Hello friends, here with a lonesome gamer, and today I'm playing Dungeon Universalis. Now we've had that massive battle at the end of the last video, and we managed to survive that level. At least most of us did. She was killed, but luckily the dwarf had the water of life, which allowed him to revive her. But sadly our warhound, we've lost him. But before we continue the campaign, I want to share my thoughts about some house ruling. Now I played the game now for 40 or 50 hours, which is a lot for me. Usually I don't play games that much. And I think I understand more and more what I like about the game and what I don't like that much, and where I want to go with this game. Because in general I like it a lot. But yeah, it has definitely flaws from that maybe not subjective flaws. Let's put it that way. Things that that don't match with my playing style and what I expect from my perfect dungeon crawl. And the rules are also perfectly fine with that. They actually allow you, not that you need that permission, but they give you the permission and they encourage you to just come up with your own rules and kind of change the game so that you get more enjoyment out of it. And by the way, I think this is one of the real strengths of this game, that you have a very, very solid system. And it really allows for house ruling, for modding. It really encourages you very much here. And I just love that about this game. So let's see there are a couple of things. There are basically 4 ideas that I had until now that I definitely want to change. And one I already implemented during the last quest, and that was a change in the rule for the initiative roll. The problem that I have is this is in general a really quite a tactical game, and there is of course luck involved, but there is a lot of thought process and tactical maneuvering is also in there. And I find it really frustrating if you want to start a battle and then basically, especially, that is something that is especially harmful in the main room, but also sometimes already in other rooms. You have that one roll going on where you just roll 4 dice, right? 2 of you on 2 of the enemy. And if that die roll comes up with a bad result, you are in a lot of trouble. And the problem is you cannot really do that much to mitigate that if it's a specific type of result. And that is if you have a low result and the enemy has a high result. If that happens, you're just screwed basically. And I mean, you can get modifiers for that, but only so much. And you can do a reroll, but what do you reroll if the enemy has a high result and you have a low result, right? I mean, what do you do? hoping, burn your fortune in a position where you might need it later in that battle because everybody is threatening to attack you immediately, and saying, okay, I'm gonna spend one fortune hoping to roll an 11 or something, or force the enemy and hoping that he rolls, I don't know, a 2 or 3. So you see the point here. And that was probably the thing that actually bothered me the most in this game for a while, because I thought right from the beginning, wow, this is so harsh. If you fuck up that single roll, this can wipe out your whole party. Or at least it can really cost the life of one character or so. And we've seen that here, for example. She lost that roll and she was kind of drawn in here. And because, especially at the start of the battle, when you kind of open the door, it can happen that you are the only one within reach or within line of sight, and it is often the case. And then it is easily possible that simply everybody will attack you, and you just die because you fucked up the initiative roll. And so there were a couple of thoughts I had about it. Actually, it went to a point where I thought, okay, maybe you should, for example, like you do it in a with the fortune rolls, when you take a fatal hit, maybe you should do something like, okay, you can re-roll that roll, and if you don't win it, then you can spend a second fortune, and then you will automatically win initiative. But then again, I thought, that's a little too strong, and I don't really like that either. So I came up with the idea that I had. And so basically you just follow your standard roll rules. And if you win, okay, there's no problem. If the enemy wins, of course you can do a re-roll, and then if he wins again, or if he still wins, that basically only means that the creature who did this successful initiative roll for the enemy, that this creature will really activate. If there should be a card of surprise thing or so, you will do it at that point, so you will kind of turn your heroes backwards to the enemy and this kind of thing. But then you will also have to roll for every other enemy creature individually against your first roll that you did when you rolled for initiative. And only the creatures who actually win that roll, they will then also activate in the first turn. So for me, it turned out I had that situation twice in this adventure, and here there was just nothing I could do. I mean, we had these massive modifiers of +3 because I had to break through this reinforced door here, and I lost, and then I rolled for everybody, but yeah, everybody activated. They just fucking heard me breaking that door, and that makes sense. But in here there was this other room where there were also 6 creatures, and in the end only 3 of them activated, and the other 3 just realized too late that I entered the room, and therefore they kind of, I don't know, hesitated for a few seconds, and then they only activated basically in the second turn of combat of the enemy. And yeah, I think overall that's a better system because it gives you a little more room for mitigation. If you come into this situation when you roll low and the enemy rolls high, you can spend a fortune point. And then, you know, if you get a better result, you might not beat your first enemy, but at least you got a chance that the other guys will maybe then roll lower than you did. For example, if you rolled a 2 at the start and the other guy rolled an 11 or something, you then can say, okay, I re-roll, and then you roll a 6 or a 7, and there's a good chance that the other players will go below that, or at least some of them, or the other enemies. By the way, also thematically, I think this makes kind of sense. I find it odd that when you are basically an intruder and it is in general already kind of weird that there are people wearing their armor and their weapons inside their home or whatever, inside the bandit's lair or what. I mean, that is pretty odd. And I mean, just think about it. You're sneaking in, which is something you usually do as an intruder. You try to be, you try to be quiet, and you open a door, and then you have these people already with their drawn weapons, and someone already aims an arrow at you, and you think, what were these guys doing? I mean, are they constantly in this state of alert when they are at home, so that they permanently expect somebody to come through the door? It's a pretty paranoid world that they're living in. So I find that odd, and so therefore I think thematically it makes perfect sense that you have some advantage when it comes to these initiative rolls. And on the other hand, and that is a problem where it all goes down a little bit when it comes to theme anyway. For example, if you have a combat going on in this room and then you open a door into an adjacent room and there are people in there, and you have an encounter there again, and these people are caught off guard or something. I mean, there was a fucking combat going on there and they didn't realize that this did happen. This is a point where reality really breaks down in this game. You could start modifying this. I mean, and they kind of do that when you fire a weapon, for example. When you have fire weapons during a combat, you use these noise markers, which will then alert other enemy creatures that are somehow in the same house or so. And that makes perfect sense. But the combat itself makes a lot of noise, right? I mean, if you have the swords clashing, but okay, we don't want to be super realistic here. But in general, that is my idea of the initiative roll. So just, if you fail, rolling again for the individuals. I think that makes it, a little more, or let's say a little less luck dependent. It just doesn't come down to that single roll anymore. So the second thing I want to address is the use of fortune points when it comes to a fatal blow. And I've seen it now a couple of times when I played, and I've seen it again in this game with her, basically. The problem is, often there are situations, especially when it comes down, that you might get killed. If it comes down to these fatal blows, there are often situations where one character is really exposed, usually the one who opens the fucking door, and he gets somehow isolated so that the attacks are no longer distributed between your different heroes, but that single character somehow has to take a ton of attacks. And there are situations where you simply cannot avoid it. It just doesn't work. And the problem with that is, if you then take a fatal blow, you can avoid that if you still have 2 fortune, or if you're lucky, even with 1 fortune, you spend the fortune, roll the die. If it's not a 5 plus, you can spend a second fortune, and then you can completely ignore the fatal blow. But what's the problem with that? Well, it is that the next enemy will attack you again. And if you are already in a critical situation where you take fatal blows, right? That is usually the case when you're not doing well. It is not unlikely that you will take the next fatal blow immediately afterwards. And that is something, and this happened here, by the way. We've seen it here. And I don't like that a lot, because then you basically it's just a matter of how much fortune do you have left, how many fatal blows can you take. I mean, you could argue, okay, that's part of the game, but again, it's kind of sometimes it's an unavoidable situation that you take all these hits, and it feels a little too harsh for me. So my idea is that when this happens and you take a fatal blow, you basically are knocked out and you remove your miniature from the board and the game continues. And then when it's the hero's turn again, then you have to use your fortune to revive your hero. And then you can basically revive your hero in a radius of, 4 or 5 spaces of where you were actually killed, but, for example, not adjacent to an enemy. And you're not allowed to do an attack action during the first turn when you revived your hero. So the reason why I think that makes sense is you're dead, but you're not immediately killed again and again and again until you have no more fortune. Instead, you get a little bit of a break. You have the option to consolidate yourself. You can, depending on the situation, you can, you can grab a weapon if you were unarmed. You can, you can change from a ranged weapon to a melee weapon, or you can, especially important, you can drink a healing potion, for example. Or if you are out of fortune, you can simply stay away from the fight. You can hide behind the other guys, and go to a distance or whatever, so that you're safe. And in a way, I think that's the way this whole fortune concept should work. It should give you the option to take a break. It should give you a real chance not to die. And so I think this is something that makes a lot of sense. So overall, these were pretty small changes. But now there's one thing that I think that was also a big thing that bothered me pretty much from the start. And it was that weird race here on that track between the dark player and the heroes, with these achievement points here, and then you get achievement points for every kind of crap, and for every turn that the heroes use. So at the start of the dark player's turn, basically, this thing goes on 1 space, and then by the end of the game, if the heroes have more of these achievement points than the dark player, which is really hard to do, and the heroes get an additional experience point. Every one of the heroes does. So that's the idea, and it gives you kind of this competitive situation between the dark player and the heroes. And I don't know, maybe that's more interesting if you play really against a human dark player, but I think against an artificial dark player, this thing, I don't know, it feels pretty pointless. It adds a lot of tracking to the game for very little effect, basically. I mean, you get that point maybe or not, but it feels really kind of like, okay. And in the end, for me, in most adventures, I kind of screwed this up somehow because I didn't care too much. And at some point I realized that the dark player is probably about 10 points ahead or something, which is pretty easy, especially at the start of the adventure. And you get the feeling, okay, I'm not going to win that anymore, so why would I bother? And I just don't do it anymore. And this is also something that I did here. I simply at some point stopped tracking that. And the reason is also because, now, I mean, yeah, once you have the feeling you've lost the race, it doesn't matter for you anymore. Even if it's, you might still have a chance. But you know, sometimes I get frustrated pretty quickly, and if I'm behind 10 points or something, I don't care anymore about that. Now when that happens, problem is that the whole time is also not important anymore during the exploration turns. Of course, time and maneuvering is still very important during combat, but the only reason how many turns you take during this adventure, the only reason why that is important is because of this race. But if that race is already lost, then you don't have to care anymore about that, and basically then you simply can take unlimited time to prepare your heroes, search rooms, whatever. And in the end, if that doesn't matter, also the way the heroes move, all these things don't matter anymore. If you have unlimited time, who cares? So what that meant was that I basically fought the battle and then simply positioned my heroes before the next door when I opened the door, and when that was an empty room, I simply took the miniatures and positioned them here, and so on. And you could say that this is kind of that's a bit of a shame, you know. A little bit of the theme goes away here. The movement becomes just not interesting, and you're just basically opening doors and fighting battles. And another issue that I had was that I had the feeling that the exploration aspect of the game, so for example interacting with furniture or searching rooms for treasure, that this gets actually penalized by that track, because these are things that cost you time, and you need actions to search these things. And well, when you spend an action during a turn, you cannot run, for example. And when you search a room, you're not allowed to move at all. So again, you're going to lose time, which, yeah, and in the end, so another aspect, by the way, about that is that very often there is not much of value in these furnitures. That's different to the special elements, by the way, but the standard furnitures very often just have very low value items to find. But for me, a good dungeon crawl still kind of lives from the exploration aspect. So I love to roll a die and find something in a cupboard or in a library or on the table. I think that's cool. So I thought about this whole thing and you know, the exploration, this track, these are all things that kind of work together. They're kind of connected somehow. And for me, they don't really work. So here's my idea. And this is definitely something I have to play test, and I have to adjust how it really works well and all that. But I think the basic concept is actually pretty cool. So first of all, heroes basically get achievement points for all successful exploratory actions. So they also simply get an achievement points for searching furniture, which they usually wouldn't. I want to give them also an achievement point for searching a room for gold if they find at least 2 coins of gold. Now, to do that, you need a successful perception test, and in addition, you need to roll at least a 3 to see how much gold you found. Because you basically, what you do is it's a 3-sided die plus 1, and that's the result of the gold that you find. So is that a 3? No, you need to find 3 gold basically, right? So I don't want it basically to be a 1 or 2. But anyway, so the thing is, this is just a small detail. In addition, they also get a point every time they open a door. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So they will get quite a few achievement points more than they actually would get otherwise. However, this counting of achievement points stops once the main room is reached. And there, in this way, it kind of is evened out, that the heroes get more achievement points before they enter the main room, because they don't get the achievement points for killing the creatures here. So that's the race stops, right, the moment they enter the main room. But the important part of this whole thing, why I do that, is I'm not going to track the achievement points on this track anymore. I'm going to basically count them here on the value point tracker. So whenever the heroes, for every turn the heroes take, for every fortune the heroes have to spend, all this will make the dark player stronger and stronger. And every time the heroes basically, or the dark player gains an achievement points, his value points will go up. And whenever the heroes explore this, find additional information, whatever, kill creatures and so on, this will weaken the dark player and he will lose points. And in this way, the whole thing matters, because it has a real impact on the game, because at the end of the game, depending on how many achievement points the dark player has, that will then have an impact on how strong the boss creature will be, because he uses these achievement points to improve his boss creature. So even if I'm behind, let's say I'm 10 points behind in the race or 15 points, and I realize, fuck, this makes no sense anymore. Why would I track that? I'm not gonna win anymore anyway. Well, now it makes a lot of sense, because there's a big difference if you're 5 points behind or if you're 10 points behind, right? Or if you're 15 points behind. So you really want to try to gain achievement points also by searching. For example, you now have a higher motivation to search stuff and all that, because it gives you achievement points. And the movement still matters now, because you got to kind of track that, how fast you are. It's not, you don't come to a point where you say, fuck it, who cares anymore? And yeah, I think that makes the thing much more interesting. And in addition to that, after all this tracking, here you simply get a victory point or not. Here it feels there's something at stake. The whole thing really has an impact, right? It is not just about winning or losing. It is about how strong is that final enemy. And that has, for me then, the whole tracking process here has a much bigger impact on the game, and it feels much more interesting to me. There's one final issue, and that is, how do the players, if you want that in the game, that extra thing, the kind of the competition between the dark player and the players. So how do you determine if the players get that extra victory point? How do you determine if the players have beaten the dark player or not? I find that idea in a solitaire game pretty ridiculous. I think if you win the whole thing, you won the game, right? But there is this additional win, this extra good win by beating the dark player. And I think you can also incorporate this in this system. You could, for example, say, if at any point during the game the dark player has not enough victory points to play a card that he draws, then the players have basically won that additional victory point if they win the overall scenario and no one of them gets knocked out. So the dark player, if he comes into this position, he can still gain more victory points or more value points by simply discarding it, and he can still play on, and he can still play new cards. So that doesn't change anything, but we just realize, okay, he can't play this card. So at that point, I basically won. I get an additional victory points if I survive that whole thing, and the dark player can just play on like he usually would do. So yeah, that's my idea about this whole race. And there might be some issues in the balance, of course, and I gotta check that. Maybe the heroes get too many points, but you could easily change that by, I don't know, you could say we add from the beginning 5 points to the dark player, or we subtract 5, or you could say the heroes don't get any points for whatever, for opening doors, for example. That's just too many points that they can earn on during the quest, so we take these points away from them. Stuff like that. It's pretty easy to figure out how to balance that, I think. The last thing I want to talk about, and this is a bigger project, right? This is not so easy to implement, because you really got to kind of change things a little bit, and you got to come up with things and so. But you will see. For me, the character development is not ideal. I mean, the problem for me is in general, I'm not a big fan of character development in general. I just don't like it that much. I know some people love it and it's one of the most important things for them in an RPG at all. I'm not one of these people. But in this game, you know, so just as a reminder how it works. You get experience points, usually 1 per quest, and maybe an additional one somehow. And if you're very lucky, a third one, but usually 1 or 2 experience points per quest. And when you accumulated 3 experience points, you get a development point. And the development point you can use, you can trade that in for improving your character. For example, you can either trade in a development point for a fortune point. There's a maximum of fortune points you can have. I don't remember how much that is. You can trade in a certain number of development points, and that is race dependent. You can see that here. For example, here most of it are 2 development points, sometimes just 1. So you can trade in a number of development points to improve your stats here, your agility or your intelligence, whatever. And there's also a limit here. If you follow the rule or not is obviously up to you. You can only improve your stats by 1 up to this racial maximum by accumulating experience points. If you don't like that, man, don't do it. I mean, this is just, you can simply ignore this limitation. I've seen some complaints about that on BGG, but come on, this is really not a big deal. But okay, this is the official rule and you can follow it or not. And last, and this is maybe the main way to improve your characters, you can trade in an experience point for a skill. And depending on you can see that here, I already explained that, but I want to do it again. There are the different classes here and these are the different classes. So depending on the class you are, this guy, for example, is, I don't know, a warrior. This is this symbol here. So we have all these red symbols and one of them matches that one. And that allows him then to actually gain that skill. And overall there are 4 types of skills. One of them are the racial skills, and you cannot learn racial skills. So you cannot learn to be small, for example. But you can learn the other skills, and there is this over here, for example, you roll a die, and if you roll a 1 to 4, the warrior will basically learn a combat skill, and then you simply go through the combat skills and you can pick one. Some of them have a minimum requirement concerning your stats. So sometimes you need a combat skill of 4 or something to actually be able to learn a given skill. Okay, so this is basically how this whole character development works out. I got 2 problems with that. The first one is, and this is a huge thing, right? Because this is something that is not easily solved. I don't like long campaigns, and I want my campaigns to be shorter. And if I want to come up with my own campaign eventually, and this campaign is going to be shorter, I kind of have to accelerate the whole character development to keep the whole thing a little bit balanced. Because I also like to start with kind of weaker characters, and in the end of the campaign I want to have a strong character. But if the campaign is shorter, you have to accelerate that whole thing. However, there is a thing that is really, really cool about that development system that they came up with here, and that is the distinction between experience points and development points. At first it looks overly complicated and it seems to make not that much sense, but if you think about it, actually it's really cool, because it allows you to adjust the speed of the character development. So you usually, according to the rules, you need 3 experience points to get 1 development point. And then you can trade in the development points for all these advantages. But of course, there's no reason why you shouldn't say, for me it takes only 2 experience points to get 1 development point, right? Or if you want a super fast character development, you might even say, okay, an experience point is equal to a development point. And after every quest or so, I can simply choose one of these things. And then you just play, I don't know, 6 quests for a whole campaign, for the whole career of one of your heroes, for example. And you still get a pretty cool development of the heroes going on. And you can even slow that thing down. You can say, okay, it takes 4 or whatever, how many years you want to play that thing. And then, it's a very easy system that allows to adjust the speed of character development. And I think this is really cool. But that is not actually what I wanted to change at the moment. As I said, eventually when I play another campaign, which is going to be shorter, I might consider doing this. But my problem with this whole concept with this whole character development is that it focuses a lot on skills. So you cannot really improve the stats of your heroes very much, a little bit, and that will have an impact, there's no doubt. But most of the time, what happens is you will basically pile up these skills. They are fairly cheap. You basically I think you only need a single development to do that. So you end up piling up these skills, and you might already start with 1 or 2, and you have maybe these racial skills, for example. I don't know. She has, for example, the Lost in the Dark, which is not exactly, it's kind of a negative skill. And and then you start accumulating all these skills. And this guy has now overall 6 skills. And for example, I always forget the Trapper skill. And it's really hard to manage the characters. They got armor, they got weaponry, they got their stats, and then they got all these skills. And if you have to manage 4 characters in this fairly heavy game, things become really complicated. And I think it's very, very hard to really remember all the skills if you play that thing solitaire. And in addition, I simply don't like the idea of getting just more and more of these skills. It feels not really that interesting to me, because many of these skills are also not very strong. Some are really strong, others are not. And just piling up these cards, it's not the kind of development that I like, that you are really getting. You don't really feel like you're getting really stronger, in a way. Now the spellcasters, they got an additional option. They can learn spells for spending a development point, but that also only goes to a certain limit. And at a certain time it doesn't make any more sense to do it. But it is clearly more interesting for the spellcasters to develop, because it gives them, a couple of more options. But overall, I have that problem that I really think I kind of want to avoid this clutter, and I would love to see a little more powerful options when I upgrade my heroes. So how could I do that? And my idea was now that first of all, I think it kind of is an option to simply limit the skills to avoid that clutter piling up. So you could say, okay, you can only learn up to, I don't know, maybe 3 or maybe 4, but I thought about 3 non-racial skills, basically. The racial skills are a little different because, Lost in the Dark, it's not an advantage anyway, and you cannot learn these things, so they feel like they are not really part of your normal skills, and you cannot, as I said, you cannot develop them in any way. But, so, okay, we have now a little bit of a limit to the skills, but the idea for me is, it would be cool if you can actually improve the skills, if you can advance in them somehow, if you can master them, right? So if you could, for example, the fast attacks, I think they're really cool, but my idea was, so let's say I have that skill fast attacks, and it says that you can roll basically 3d6 when you attack, and you take the 2 best, and you got to subtract 1 from that result, and if you roll a double 1 on 2 of the dice, not all 3, but only 2, you get a critical. So the chance that you get a critical failure is also a little bit higher. So that's the skill fast attacks. Now my idea was, okay, wouldn't it be cool if you could advance in that? So we could say, for example, if you spend, now you get that skill for 1 development point, which is officially 3 experience points. Now let's say once you have that skill, and you could say you can advance in that. So for example, you could say, if I'm willing to spend 2 development points, which would be 6 experience points, I get the option to advance to basically to a level of advanced fast attacks. And I could imagine then like the fast attacks, but you don't have to subtract 1 from the roll. Very simple in this case, nothing too exciting, but they still become significantly stronger, but they are costly, right? I mean, 6 experience points is a lot. And then I think there should be even a third option to master that. So not just advance, but you can be a master in fast attacking. And that will then cost you, again, this time 3 development points, which is 9 experience points. That's a lot, right? But if you are a really high level hero, that is then maybe where you want to go. And then you could become a master of fast attacks, and I could see, for example, that you are then allowed simply to add 1 instead of subtracting 1, right? So in this case, it feels pretty easy to come up with how to make this thing stronger. And I could simply see something similar here with a herbalist, for example. I mean, that one allows you to create an extra potion at the start of the quest, except for a mana potion. So you can simply grab a potion at the start of each quest. And you could also say, okay, maybe I can advance in that knowledge. And then I could say, okay, maybe it's allowed to grab 2 potions. And maybe, for example, there's a restriction, you cannot take 2 potions of the same kind. And if you are master herbalist, you can take 3 potions. All of a different kind though. So this is just an idea, right? And the thing is, you have to go through every fucking skill and come up with an idea how you can do that. But I think, hey, why not? It's somehow fun to do this. And I can see maybe some things, you can really make them interesting. For example, I thought about the fast shooting. You could say, okay, the fast shooting is kind of similar like the fast attacks. You can attack twice, but you got to subtract 1. And you can also say, okay, you can attack twice, but when you advance, you don't have to subtract anymore 1. And then you could say, okay, if you're a masterful shooter, you could say, okay, you have now the option, for example, to attack 3 times, but you have to subtract 1 or 2, or you can attack twice without subtracting anything, right? So that gives you an interesting choice here. And I think there are a lot of these skills that are in themselves not so super exciting, but I think you could really spice them up if you can advance them and if they can do some crazy or interesting things if you kind of master them. And it's just your imagination. Again, like the box cover of the game says, the limit is your imagination, and this is exactly the case here. And I also can say, I think what you probably should do is that nobody goes immediately on mastering just a single skill and that's it. You could say, okay, to become advanced, you need first 3 basic skills, and then to become a master in something, you need at least 2 advanced skills, and then you can master one of them. And this is it, you can only be a master in a single skill. This is, there should be some, I thought about that, you could do it like this, for example. So 3 basic skills to become advanced, and then, 2 advanced skills to become a master. But this is something I made up in, 10 minutes or something. So maybe, of course, this has to be play tested more. And I also thought about it probably makes a lot of sense if you somehow do some minimum character statistics and combine them with the fast attacks. And not necessarily the statistics that you already need if you want to fight. So if this guy wants to, let's say he wants to become an advanced fast attacker, I don't necessarily want to say he's need a minimum of 5 on his combat value because he wants that anyway. But I could, for example, say he needs a minimum of 4 on his agility to become a fast attacker. So he also kind of has to figure out how to improve his character. And I think that would open up a lot of ways for different kind of character improvement. And I think I would like that more, and it also gets rid of this clutter of skills where some of them are pretty pointless, or not really pointless, but they're just not that strong, and you just have them because I don't know, you didn't know what else to take. But here you can really kind of focus on 3 skills, and then you can eventually become really powerful mastering a single skill. So that's my idea about character development, and I think I'm going to try that. Okay, so you know what? I think I'm going to load this up here. I talked a lot, and these were just some thoughts about how I kind of think I can improve this game to my playing style, my the way I would like it more. I can already see some people that, oh gosh, this is horrible, I want to go a totally different way. And that's exactly what makes this game so interesting. Everybody can kind of take it and, you know, can change the system a little bit, can tweak with it a little bit. Just fantastic. Go ahead. But this is just my ideas, and yeah, maybe I can give you some inspiration here or whatever. And yeah, I'm going to use that I'm going to use some of these concepts, I think, in my future playthroughs, or at least try them a little bit. So hope to see you on the next video or on lonesomegamer.com. Bye.